welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're doing a copycat. We are going to copy a pouch that I saw online at one of my favorite bag shops, and we're gonna make it ourselves. So a few weeks ago, I was perusing the Stoney Clover website, as I often do. It's one of my favorite retailers to buy bags from. They are investment pieces, in my opinion. And they are worth every penny, honestly. They are fantastic, they are made so well, they are durable, and they are just the cutest, most brightly colored bags you're gonna find out there. While I was looking on the website, I saw this little clear pouch right here. So you can see it's like got a band of color on the top, and then it's got a clear bottom, and then it's got a binding around it. And I fell in love with it. However, this pouch is $68, which was quite pricey for a clear pouch. But I love the design so much. So I zoomed in and I zoomed in and I zoomed out and I zoomed back in, and I kind of figured out how they put it together. Now, my version is not nearly as perfect as their version. Nothing I make is as perfect as what you're gonna find at a higher end store, but it's pretty darn close. So I wanna show you, today we're making a half clear pouch. This is clear vinyl down here on the bottom. This is just regular vinyl up top. We have a zipper going along the top edge, and then the top part of this pouch is lined with quilt cotton. So that's what I'm gonna walk you through today. This is not identical to the Stoney Clover pouch, but it is a copycat 100%. So you can see on this pouch, most of it is clear vinyl, and I encourage you to have fun with this. There are so many different clear vinyls out there. This is actually like a glittery clear vinyl. This one here is an animal print clear vinyl. This pouch here has actually already been full of stuff, but you can see it's a bunch of little teacups. So many options. So I will have a list of retailers down in the description where I've been finding clear vinyl and been really happy with this. And then you can see the top portion on the front and back is regular vinyl. We do have a shorter zipper with some zipper tabs. And then when we open it up, only that top portion right there, that is lined with quilt cotton. And then we're gonna do binding around the edges. So first, let me just say, I'm gonna show you the way that I put these together, which is easiest for me. This might not be the way that you want to put it together. So this is a tutorial, but it's mostly an encouraging walkthrough to get you to be more creative and change things to make this your own. So for example, let's look at this pouch right here. I'm using pull fabric for the lining. Now, a lot of times we use pull fabric, like food safe pull, for lining of snack bags or lining of bags that you know is gonna be wet. Or actually, a lot of people use pull fabric for reusable baby diapers, if you can believe it. So pull is a great material because it's kind of stretchy and it doesn't fray. So we can have the raw edges on the back, we can stretch it around these corners without pleats, and it's easy to work with. So I will be using pull fabric for the binding. Now, if you're really comfortable with using the double fold binding where you cut it on the bias and it's quilt cotton, then you do that. Do whatever you're comfortable with. But for me, this was what was the easiest to work with and gave the cleanest look. So I will be providing you the template for this bottom piece if you'd like it. I'm also gonna give you all the measurements in the tutorial. I am not selling a pattern or anything like that. I will provide everything for free. Since this is not my own pattern, this is just a copycat of a really cool design I've seen online, I am obviously not going to charge you for that pattern. This will all be free. The measurements that I come up with will be free. I do encourage you to get a little bit creative. So I will have the template and the measurements for this size pouch, but then I went and I played with like a smaller version too. So you can see this one is just a little bit smaller. And I will also have the template and the measurements for the smaller version if you want it. So that will all be on my website. You can print it out, follow along in the video. This is one of those bags where you kind of follow along with it once and then you got it. You can just bust out a whole bunch of them. So you can see I've been having a lot of fun with these. I've made quite a few so far. And then this one here, which is kind of heavy because it's got all my goodies in it. So like I said, I will have links for everything down in the description of this video. I will also have the link for the original pouch on the Stoney Clover website. Don't worry, I did end up ordering one. I know, it's like $70 for a pouch, but I've been so inspired by the design and it is so cute. And Stoney Clover is gonna make it in a way that I can't. And they also have like these like letters you can have put, there's so many options. So if you don't wanna make it, I do really encourage you to go check out the Stoney Clover website. buy the pouch. It's gonna be amazing, I promise. But if you've got your own fun vinyl and everything and you wanna make your own, I mean, let's give it a shot, right? Let's give it a shot. So if you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all you want to say, leave them down in the comment section. If you have any tips or tricks or alterations or sizes or anything like that, leave them down in the comment section. There are so many things you can do with this. I'm sure my way might not be the best way, so I'd love to hear how you're doing it. All right, guys, this is a pretty quick tutorial, but I will have timestamps for every step down in the description of this video. They'll also be running along the bottom of the screen here. So let's get started. All right, so here's all the material for today. For most of this, you're gonna need a fat quarter, except for the binding. The binding, you're gonna need a longer cut. So for the top accent vinyl, it's just that top outer piece, you're gonna have a piece of vinyl here. Could you use quilt cotton? Yes, you could definitely use quilt cotton or cotton canvas or any sort of fraying material here if you wanted to, since all of the edges will be wrapped up. So the top piece doesn't have to be vinyl, but if you're making the bottom piece vinyl, which is kind of the whole pattern, the top piece being vinyl is really helpful because then it's all kind of the same thickness and sturdiness. But you do you, I will be showing you in vinyl. So here's my top piece of vinyl, and then here is my bottom piece of vinyl. And if you guys did not know this, there are so many clear vinyl options out there now that have a print on them. It's the coolest thing ever. You don't have to just get the packaging from your bed sheets and use that as your clear vinyl. There are a lot of options. You're gonna want a thicker one here. Now, and I only say that because the thinner gauged vinyl is stretchy. For example, this purple clear vinyl here, it's thinner than this clear vinyl and it stretches a bit. And if you're trying to make this as easy as possible and not, get super frustrated with things stretching and sticking, I do encourage you to get this gauge. So I will have a little note down in the description about what gauge I think is best for this. There are some cool vinyl options out there. Vinyl like this only has one sticky side. Honestly, the back is not that sticky. So we'll talk about vinyl more. And like I said, I'll give you some options down in the description. Here I have just a scrap piece of fabric for my zipper tab. We'll go over the measurement for that in just a moment. And then a fat quarter of quilt cotton for the lining of the bag. This is just for the top accent piece. There's obviously no lining for the bottom clear portion. And then you're going to need a cut for your binding. Now I think your cut should be at least 30 inches long. That's longer than it needs to be, but it's good to have it longer than it needs to be. I'm using pull material, so I will be giving you the measurements as I use it for pull material, which might not be the same if you're using quilt cotton and double folding it, so just be aware of that. If you want to change up how you do this, definitely do that. I encourage you to change everything, honestly. I'd love to see what else you do with this as a building block. Okay, so we're just going to jump right into the pattern pieces. I want to keep this as easy as possible. So this is the template I will have on my website. As you can see, I have it marked and I have everything written out on it, how much of what sizes of everything you're going to need. So all these measurements are written out on the pattern piece, and you can download this on my website. I also have the piece for the small. It all comes together. Very easy. You're going to print it off in 2 pieces and then tape them together using this middle mark here to guide it, just so it's just one size like this, okay? So this pattern piece is going to be used for the clear vinyl. You're going to have 2 cuts of that clear vinyl. Then you're going to have 2 cuts of the top vinyl. So if you want to just kind of make your own bottom piece, this is 11.5 inches wide. And then 5 1/4 of an inch tall, so this is for that bottom piece. And then I rounded out the corners 1.5 inches up and 1.5 inches over. So just like that. If you want to do this yourself and change the rounding and change everything, just the basic rectangle of this is an 11.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch rectangle. For the top contrasting pieces, they're going to be 11.5 inches wide by 3 3/4 of an inch tall. And then the lining piece is going to be 11.5 inches wide by 4 1/4 inch tall, and we'll go over why that's so different when we attach all this together. Then we have our zipper. I like the zipper to be shorter than the top edge of the pouch, so this is 10.5 inch long zipper. And then I have a zipper tab cut. This is 4 inches by 2 inches. This is quilt cotton. It is not lined with anything. Also, the quilt cotton for the lining is not lined. If you want to line it, go ahead and do it. I'm trying to keep the bulk as thin as possible, and I didn't really feel like it needed it, but you change it however you like. And then I have my binding. Now, my binding is pull material, P-U-L, and it is 30 inches long by 1 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay, I know that's kind of a weird number. We're not double folding this, kind of. I mean, we're folding it twice, but I'll show you. I'll show you once we get there. It's a little weird, but I think it works. You try it. And then I have my bag tag as always. All right, here's a bunch of the other stuff we'll be using today. Always clips and stiletto steam ripper. The stiletto is gonna help a lot with keeping the binding in place. So again, walk through that. Some little snips are always helpful with the thread. And then I have my Kai fabric scissors. For the top thread, I'll be using this Tex 35, and for the bottom thread, I'm using this Gutermann. And then my needle today will be a Schmetz Microtex 8012. As long as you're not using vinyl that's crazy thick, you should be fine with this. If you are really going for that super thick vinyl, you might want to use a 9014 needle. For marking on fabric, I have a heat erasing marker, and then for marking on vinyl, I have a vinyl marker. Double-sided tape is super helpful here. It's just going to help kind of keep things together so that we don't have to struggle with it with our hands so much. And then I have tissue paper. Now, tissue paper is really helpful because we got some sticky vinyl, okay? We've got sticky vinyl that's gonna wanna stick to the presser foot, it's gonna wanna stick to the bed of the machine, it's gonna wanna stick to everything. So tissue paper is helpful, even just a piece of tissue. So let me just tell you, if you're using tissue paper, which is like gift tissue paper, you can sew over this just fine and then rip it out of your stitches. If you're using an actual tissue, you're not gonna wanna sew over that because they're pretty fluffy. They're gonna jam up your machine. Some of them have lotion on them even. You don't wanna do that to your machine. So if you're using just like an actual tissue, just make sure it stays under the vinyl, but it doesn't get under the needle. And then if you have a Teflon presser foot to help the presser foot from sticking, that will be great. If not though, you can just use some Scotch tape. I actually found I didn't need to use anything on my presser foot, especially because we use a zipper foot a lot. But if you find that your presser foot is sticking quite a bit, just grab some of this tape, stick it on the bottom of your presser foot, cut a little hole for the needle, and you should be good. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is prep our zipper, which means we're just going to add the zipper tab to the end of the zipper tape. So grab your zipper tab cut of quilt cotton. This is just 4 inches by 2 inches. And let's flatten it out a bit first. And then we're gonna just fold it in half, long sides together, wrong sides together. And that will give us a nice midpoint mark. Open it up, and then we're just gonna fold those long edges in to meet that midpoint mark. And this will just hide all of the long raw edges for us. Do this for both sides. And then you can just refold the whole zipper tab in half and give it a press. And I have one piece of fabric that's going to cover both ends. So if you have a nylon zipper tape and you notice the ends are fraying quite a bit, you can always grab a lighter and just burn or melt those ends of your zipper tape, and that will prevent that from fraying. I know sometimes that can be a little distracting when we're working on it. So now it's just a nice sealed end. We don't have to worry about that fraying, getting caught up in our needle or sticking out of the zipper tab or anything like that. So let's just take the end of our zipper tape and we're just going to plop it into our little hot dog bun of a zipper tab and then wrap it around that end. Grab some clips and hold it in place. Now I'm going to take the other end of my zipper tape and I'm going to fold it up so that it goes into the other side of my zipper tab. Your zipper tab should be plenty long. It is longer than it needs to be. And then we're just going to clip that in place as well. There we go. And now I'm just going to top stitch along the folded edge that's closest to the zipper teeth at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, once you have that zipper tab sewn on, all we have to do is line our scissors up with the edge of the zipper tape. And we're not cutting the actual zipper tape, we're just cutting that tab. And we're cutting it so that it's the same width as the zipper tape. You see, isn't that a nice little finish to our zipper? So do this for both sides. Just trim it down. There we go. Now our zipper is all ready to go. So let's grab our zipper tape and our lining and our top exterior pieces and also your tag if you have one that you want to add. And we're going to find the midpoint on both sides of our zipper tape and then the top edges of our vinyl. You don't have to worry about the lining. But for these 3 pieces, find the midpoint, both sides of zipper tape, top edges of your vinyl. I like to just fold the items in half and then pinch to find that midpoint, and then you can use a marking tool or you can use scissors and just super tiny itty bitty cut right on that tip, and that'll give you a pretty decent size triangle so you can find your midpoint. Okay, so now take whichever one of your vinyl panels you want to be the front and lay it right side up and then the top side away from you. Now, take your zipper tape, and I like the zipper when closed to be going towards the left, whatever preference you have. Honestly, it doesn't even matter sometimes, but I'm gonna have my zipper going to the left when it's closing, and I'm going to lay my zipper right side down. So the pull is side down. I'm gonna match up those midpoint marks, and I'm gonna put a clip right on that midpoint mark, and then I'm gonna clip out towards the end. Now remember, our zipper tape is an inch shorter than our top vinyl, so it should not reach all the way to the end. If it does, you need to reevaluate your zipper tape because it should not reach the end. All right, now let's just go baste this zipper in place at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I will be using my zipper foot now. All right, once you have that zipper basted in place, go grab one of your lining cuts of material. Mine is just quilt cotton. You could definitely use a waterproof canvas here. If you really wanted this whole pouch to be like a beach pouch, and you wanted to make sure that if you put stuff in there, the fabric's not gonna get all soggy, then definitely use waterproof canvas here or pull fabric even instead of the quilt cotton. But the quilt cotton is gonna be easier, so maybe for your first time use quilt cotton, and I'll show you why in just a moment. So let's just line this up. The quilt cotton piece is right side down, and we're gonna line it up with that top edge of our zipper tape. And then let's just clip these together, making sure it's nice and straight. Since my quilt cotton is not interfaced with anything, it's more likely to stretch when I'm sewing it. So it might not end up exactly the same size width-wise. That's okay. That's okay. This project can be a little messy. We're pretty much just gonna wrap all these raw edges in a binding anyway, so if it's a little off, we'll cut it and it'll be fine. So now let's sew along this edge, anywhere between 1/4 of an inch and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm gonna go with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, but if that's just a little too close to the zipper teeth for you, then just go with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alrighty, so once you have these sewn together, you can press the lining back. So you're not gonna wanna put your iron on your vinyl, okay? So if you wanna press this, you can press it very gently. Just don't get the iron on the vinyl. It doesn't like it. It doesn't work well together. It melts. And then we're just going to pinch our lining and our exterior wrong sides together. And I'm gonna give it a good finger press. If you have a little a seam roller, you can definitely use that here to press that down. You could flip this over. So we're just looking at the back and then press it from the back. That's fine because our iron is not directly touching the vinyl. So you can press it from the back. Whatever is easiest for you. Okay, so once we have this nice and as flat as we can get it and pressed, we're going to top stitch along this top edge on the vinyl at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you can go all the way from one end to the other. Since we're not turning this out or anything, we can just top stitch the whole top edge. Okay, so now if you want to add your bag tag, you can definitely do that. And you can add your tag to the front or the back. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes I add mine to the front, sometimes I add mine to the back. I know I'm a very mysterious person. But today I'm going to add it just centered and on the front. If you have a fun design here, go ahead and off-center it a little bit. Just remember that, you know, these sides about where the zipper tape are, that's going to be eaten up by binding. So don't put it over there. Unless you have like an in the binding one, then that sounds great. But we're just going to center ours today. So I always like to use some double-sided tape when I am doing my bag tag, because when I'm at the sewing machine, I have a tendency to let this kind of do that. So I'm going to put some double-sided tape on the back here, and you can definitely get a ruler out and measure the midpoint, find the exact place. Don't get it too low down here because this will be folded into a seam. So I'm just going to have it a little bit higher up by my zipper, and I'm going to use the other midpoint on my zipper tape to help me kind of eyeball this. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. So now I'm going to go top stitch around all four edges of my tab at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So as I've been doing, I did not back stitch when I started those stitches. Instead, what I do is I keep all of the tails really long, and I'm gonna pull on the bobbin tail until I can see some of that top stitching coming through, and then I just pull the top thread back. We've done this in a few different videos. This is just a really fun way to top stitch something, so from the front you can't really tell where did it start, where did it end, because you can't see the back stitching. But if you're more comfortable back stitching, then just back stitch. It looks great too. So I'm just gonna knot this about 3 times on the back. There we go, make it secure, and then I'll just cut those threads. There we go. Now our front panel's ready to go. Now we're gonna do the same thing with the other side of the zipper, and then we're gonna attach the bottom. I know, we're doing everything in a little bit of a weird order. So take your vinyl back top piece and lay it right side up, and the little midpoint mark should be over on the edge away from you. Take your zipper unit and lay it right side down. And let's just match up the midpoint mark on the zipper and the exterior vinyl. Clip those together and then clip out to the edge. All right, now let's baste the zipper in place at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once that is basted in place, go ahead and grab your remaining lining piece and lay that right side down along that top edge with the zipper. And let's just clip these together. All right, and now let's stitch along this top edge, anywhere between 1/4 of an inch and a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Just make sure it's the same as what you did on the other side. So if you did 1/4 inch on the other side, just do 1/4 inch here as well. I will be doing a 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, and just like we did before, we can press this lining back. So I just kind of, you can see I just press the lining only up, and I will press that with an iron. Get that first press in, and then I'll close my zipper. That makes it easier. And I'll finger press the vinyl down. You might want to just kind of tug along both edges. Be careful here, because if you didn't add interfacing to your quilt cotton, it's going to start fraying all over the place. I know. So I'm going to flip this over so I'm looking at the lining side. I'm just going to give this a good finger press, and then I'll use my iron to press on the quilt cotton. So again, I'm not directly touching the vinyl. There we go. All right, so now let's go back to the sewing machine and top stitch along these top edge over here on the vinyl at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once again, you can go all the way from one edge to the other. All right, so now we're going to add the bottom clear vinyl. And I'm gonna give you a couple different options for attaching this. If you have a better option, definitely leave it down in the comment section. But I will show you 2 different ways to do this. So first, let's start on the front panel. And we're going to move the lining out of the way. We're just working on the exterior vinyl top. And then take your vinyl bottom and kind of lay them out how it's going to be in the end, right? This is how it's going to look. So then we have it all right side facing up. And then we're going to take our vinyl and lay it right side facing down. Now, if you're just using a clear vinyl, there probably isn't a right side or a wrong side. But for mine, there is. So we're just going to lay them right sides together and then clip along their adjoining edge. And now let's go to the sewing machine and sew along this edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're finding that this vinyl right here is sticking to your presser foot, like I said, grab some tape, put some tape on the bottom of your presser foot, and you should be fine. Okay, so once you have this sewn together, what we want to do is we want to fold this back so that the seam goes up behind the exterior vinyl. And the goal here is that that seam goes behind the exterior vinyl, and then when we flip this over, we can bring our lining down and fold that and top stitch this in place so everything is nice and neat. So for this first option, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just top stitch this seam in place without the lining. So no lining, lining is still out of the way. And I'm going to top stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to catch just the top edge of that seam. That's why it's important you do a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance here. So I'm going to go ahead and top stitch on the red vinyl at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just pinning this seam in place so that it's nice and flat. Okay, so this is top stitch down, it's nice and flat, which is going to make the next part a little bit easier. So what we want to do is take this lining and fold it down, and then we just want to fold it under so that it matches up with the bottom edge of that red vinyl. So we don't want it to be too far down, because then we'll see it from the front, right? We don't want to see that vinyl peeking through. If you see it just a little tiny bit peeking through, it's okay. It doesn't have to be exact. We also don't want it too high up, and then we don't catch it when we top stitch it. So this is the tricky part. So what you can do is just kind of eyeball it like this and push it down with your hands, just like that. Just make sure it's nice and flat. And then you can grab your iron and a scrap piece of fabric here to just protect it a little bit, and then press down. Just make sure you don't touch the iron to that clear vinyl. There we go. We just want to get this as flat as possible, okay? So now that's nice and flat. What you could also do is just measure, so you can kind of just push down one side of this, flip it up, and then measure this here. I will tell you, for this piece right here, this fold over piece from the edge of the seam to the fold, for me, that's about 7/8 of an inch. It could be bigger or smaller depending on your fabric. I know that there's a lot here, but I found that the bigger this is, the easier this part is. So as you can see, I can just fold it down. It looks nice and neat. So now I'm going to fold it back, and I'm going to grab my double-sided tape, and I'm going to add my double-sided tape to the back of my clear vinyl right on that seam. So it's not below the stitching, it's right on the seam. And that is going to be what makes sure nothing moves. And there we go. And then I'm going to pull the tape off, just like that. And now I can just fold down my lining, and it's just going to attach right to that double-sided tape. It is in place. I don't have to worry about moving around. I can flip this over. And now I'm going to top stitch along this edge from the vinyl side. So you're gonna have to trust your tape here. But I'm going to top stitch from the vinyl side at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So that's going to be a stitch that goes right between my previous 1/4 inch seam allowance and the fold of the vinyl. I know this is a little weird, but I think it works. I'm going to show you another way next, but let's just give this one a try, okay? So 1/8 of an inch seam allowance going right between the stitching and the edge of the vinyl, and that should hold the fabric and the vinyl in place. Okay, moment of truth. I did my top stitching. Let's see if it caught it. Oh yeah, that's perfect. That is some perfect top stitching. It caught it perfectly. So that is one way to do it. I do think that that's the easiest way, but it does give you 2 rows of top stitching. I know not everybody loves that. So on the next version, I'm going to show you how to do it with just 1 row of top stitching. It's a little bit trickier, but we can give it a shot. So let's flip this around. Once again, we're going to move the lining out of the way. We're just worried about this vinyl top. Lay it right side up. Take your clear vinyl and lay it right side down. Again, make sure that straight edge is the edge going against the top exterior vinyl. And then just clip these together. All right, now let's sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I think I actually am going to add some tape here because my presser foot was sticking pretty bad to the back of this. All right, so once you have that stitched in place, we're going to do the same thing we did previously where we put that seam behind the top vinyl. So just finger press it as best you can. But this time, we're not going to stitch it down on its own first, which in my opinion is just harder. I don't know. This is the way I started doing it, and I want to show it to you, but I do think that the first way we did it was easier. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to kind of press this down with our fingers to flatten it out as much as possible. Lay our lining over it, and then once again, you can either just fold this up and kind of eyeball it, and then grab your iron and just gently iron only on the quilt cotton, not on the vinyl. You could also flip this back like this and then press it, and then you can just grab your ruler and make sure it's about right. So mine was, like I said, about 7/8 of an inch. That seems okay. That's good. Okay, but you can see the problem here is that this doesn't want to lay flat, which it just makes it more difficult. So let's just press this as much as we can to lay flat. And then we'll grab our tape, and just like before, we're going to add that double-sided tape to the seam. So it's not going to be seen anywhere in the end. It's right on that seam. And then remove the bipper. And then fold down your lining to cover that tape. So now that should be holding it in place pretty well. So we can go to the sewing machine. And then again, just using your fingers to flatten this out. Top stitch at just 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here. And then that way you only have 1 row of top stitching. All right, there we go. So now that is top stitched in place as well. It still looks really great. It's not quite as precise as the other one, but it'll work. So whichever one of those is easier for you, if you have another option, definitely share it down in the comment section. So now it's pretty much done. We just got to finish it up. So we're going to just fold the whole thing wrong sides together like this. And then I like to line up the seam between the clear vinyl and the top vinyl first, because that's probably the most important seam to be lined up. And if some of your pieces are longer than the other, if the vinyl is longer than the top, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. We're going to clean it up. Right now we're just trying to get it all wrong sides together. It's kind of the nice thing about binding is binding will hide a lot of mistakes. So I'm just clipping the top edges as well. There we go. And then we'll line up the bottom. You don't have a whole lot of room to like stretch out clear vinyl, you know, so we're just going to lay it flat and clip it together. Okay, now we're going to baste around all of the edges at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I do switch to a zipper foot here, and I will stay with the zipper foot for the rest of the sewing. So 1/8 of an inch seam allowance just to baste and hold this all together. Alright, there you go. So this gives you, I mean, this is what it's going to look like just without the binding. And honestly, if you don't care about the binding, you just want to use this personally and this is great for you, go ahead and do it. Maybe you can edge coat it. I don't know. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up these edges. So I have some spots over here where the lining is kind of peeking out. I'm going to clean those up just like that. If you have any of these edges down here that are just way off, go ahead and trim it down so it's all nice in one width, because we're going to attach the binding and we don't want any of these basting stitches to show in the end. All right, looking good. The part we've all been dreading, the binding. So let me show you how I do this. So I have my piece of binding here. It's 1 1/8 inch thick, and it is 30 inches long. And I will be using the fabricy side as the right side. So this plastic shiny side, that's going to be the wrong side today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold down a top short edge, wrong sides together, anywhere between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch, just enough, okay? And I'm going to clip that. And I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch on this fold right here. And that's because I just like this I don't want this top edge here to be raw. I found that it's much neater if I have that top edge top stitched and folded over. So I'm just going to top stitch along this folded edge at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alrighty, so the top stitched edge is the edge I'm going to be focusing on. So this is my pouch. I have it right side up and I have the front right side up. That's important here. This is the front. So I'm going to take my binding and lay it right side down, and I'm going to line this up. Now I'm going to have my folded edge of my binding overextend this top edge of my pouch by about an 1/8 of an inch, because when it's all done, I want it to kind of wrap around and cover up these little raw corners, and I'll show you how that's done. So I have it lined up, right sides together with the front of the pouch, and overextending that top edge by just about an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to clip that in place. And then I'm just going to line up the right edge of the binding with the raw edge over here on the right. And I'm going to add a couple clips. Now I'm not going to clip this all in place because this is going to move around and wear out the machine, but just a little bit to get started. So now I'm going to sew this around the entire edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When I get just above this seam over here on the other side, I'm going to backstitch and stop so that I can fold over the other end of my binding. So I'll show you that, but just note, I'm not going all the way to the edge here. I'm going to go just above this connected kind of lumpy seam here, and then I'm going to backstitch, and then we'll come back. But for now, nice and slow, use your stiletto to keep everything in place, 1/4 inch seam allowance. I like to use a scrap piece of fabric to run under the needle before I start here, because I do find that the needle and the presser foot kind of like bunches it and makes it messy. So if you just start with a starter piece of fabric, you'll have a nice clean stitch here. All right, here we go. Most of it's attached. I know the anxiety is there for me too, guys. We've got sticky stuff, we've got corners, we've got binding. It's a lot of anxiety. I get it. I'm in the same boat, but we can do this. So as you can see, I didn't go all the way to the top because I want to fold over this top edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clip the side over here that's not sewn on yet, and I want to get it as tight as possible because it will be tighter than I think it will. And then I'm just going to fold it in half and fold it so that it overextends about an 1/8 of an inch, just like we set it up over here. We're going to line it up like that. And now let's just clip this like that. Okay, and as you can see, I know we have a lot of extra binding. I just want to make sure you guys have enough. We're going to top stitch this at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on this little short fold right here, and then we'll continue sewing the rest of the bag. So we're going to top stitch this, cut down this tail of this binding, and then going back to where we left off over here, we're just going to continue stitching all the way up to the edge. Okay, there we go. Binding is attached. Now, I think that that part is the hardest part. You might think the next part is the hardest part. What we want to do is we want to fold our pull over and wrap it around. And we want this raw edge to pretty much line up and cover those stitches over here. So you're going to pull it back and wrap it around. Now, pull is stretchy, and what you're going to find is that up here around this vinyl, you're going to have to really pull it tight to get it to line up with those stitches and cover them up, but down here you won't. In fact, you'll actually have it a little loose down here. Okay, so you can see it's really tight when I wrap it around, especially the seam right here between the top vinyl and the clear vinyl. That's pretty tight there because we have a lot of bulk. But once we get down here around the clear vinyl, it's much thinner. And what you don't want is you don't want to start wrapping it really tight and then you see the raw edges poking through the front. So what I do is I wrap the pull around and then I just look from the front and I let it kind of go up a little bit just so it's the same spot as the front here. Now this just takes a little finagling and you can go around the corners here too. You might be tempted to start cutting down these corners. I suggest you don't. Do this first. Wrap this whole binding around first and use some clips to see how it looks. And then if you find a place where you're like, oh, over here, I'm not able to cover up the stitches, then just very gently trim it down. But just remember, you don't have to wrap this binding around super tight. It's okay if it's a little loose. I'm just gonna go around the whole edge, but you do wanna make sure that that raw edge comes down and covers those stitches because we're gonna top stitch, and if we don't catch that back raw edge, then the binding's gonna come undone. So just keep wrapping this binding around the edges. And you might find that the binding around the corners here, it's hard to cover those stitches. That's just because when you're basting these together or sewing on that binding, it's really hard to keep a consistent 1/4 inch seam allowance there. Don't worry too much about it. If it's really bad and you just cannot cover those stitches, go ahead and just very carefully take your scissors and just shave down the clear vinyl and then rewrap your binding. But I wouldn't worry about that too much. So then once you get to the other side, just wrap that binding all the way behind. There we go. And then do your best to get it nice and tight up here around the top seam. There we go. So now we're going to top stitch from the front of our pouch at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on our binding. And we're gonna hope that we're catching the back binding as well. So I suggest going really slow, use your stiletto. Again, start with a starter piece of fabric because you will notice that your feed dogs and your presser foot will kind of muck up this top edge right here. So if you have a starter piece of fabric that you run under the needle first and then do this, it'll help keep it smooth. Definitely use your stiletto here and just keep checking. Just do a few stitches, lift it up, and make sure you're catching everything. And go slow. I will be using a zipper foot. I find a zipper foot is easiest when attaching this binding. Alright, here we go. We've got it stitched in place. Now you should be pretty happy with how it looks from the front. The front should look very clean. It's folded over. It's that perfect 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. It's the back that gives us the most trouble. Now, as long as all the edges are caught, I'm happy. I'm close on some spots, but they're caught, so I'm happy with that. If you find that you have a lot of excess over here, you might be tempted to take some scissors and kind of trim it down. You definitely can. However, when you do that, it becomes very difficult to keep it nice and smooth. So I did that same thing here with the measurements of 1/8 of an inch thick and then the 1/4 inch seam allowance. You should be pretty spot on with your binding. Now again, it just depends on the material you used, but that's why we test this out. This is a nice scrappy project. Try it out a couple times, get comfortable with it before you really commit yourself to it. So now up here at the top, our folded over top stitched binding edges should be covering up the raw edges of our fabric. If you see a whole bunch of threads everywhere, because as you might have noticed, I was back stitching a lot, you can always grab a lighter and you can kind of burn down those threads as long as those threads are polyester threads. And that will just tuck in all those threads and they'll just melt. Alrighty, and there you go. That is how we make that Stoney Clover copycat. Alrighty, what do you think? Oh, this is so cute. And I know binding is tricky. I've heard that the more you do it, the easier it gets. I would say that's true. This is definitely an improvement from when I first started doing binding, but the back is just a little tricky. So if you do binding a different way, especially if you're using like quilt cotton, you're doing the double fold binding, let me know how it goes. I'd love to see your version. I know that this can be done multiple different ways. I just found that the pull fabric was easiest for me, and I was trying to find a way that would be easiest for you as well, especially if you're just starting out with a project like this. But I know, sticky vinyl, curves, and binding, we got it all on this, but it's quick, and once you get the feel for it, you can kind of start busting out a lot of them very, very quickly. I mean, this is a good, like, boost your sojo project. You know what I mean? Where you want to get back in the sewing room, but you just don't want to commit yourself to a really big project, but you want to make something really cute that's going to make you excited to sew again. I feel like this is it. This is a great, great project. And you can use this for everything. I just love it. So if you make this, make sure you tag me on social media if you post a picture of it. I'd love to see what you're doing. I'd love to see your tweaks. I want to know how you change this up. Do you attach the vinyl to the lining a different way? Do you adjust the sizing? Do you adjust the shape? Are you gonna make this, I mean, you can make this in so many different shapes. This would be so cool. So once again, I'm gonna put a picture right here of the Stoney Clover version. It is much more professional, and I cannot wait till mine comes in the mail. I did also order some of those little stickers that are gonna go on it, so that's fun. You could also just buy those stickers from Stoney Clover. So, you know, if like you wanted to make your own, but you wanted the stickers, you could do that. You could definitely do that. I love doing copycats. I really do, because as bag makers, we see things out there that we love, and they're either perfect as is, and then you buy it and you appreciate it and you treasure it, which is how I am with many of my Stoney Clover bags. Or you see it and you're like, man, I love that design, but I really would love it in my own fabric. And that's where, you know, these copycats and these little tips and tricks and our experience as bag maker kind of kicks in, because then we can do things like that. And I love that. This is just, I love it. I love it so much. So thank you so much for sewing with me today. I hope you love making these as much as I do. I cannot wait to see your version. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.